Good evening. It's Sunday night, so you know what that means. It's another time for a Savvy Chat. And tonight we're super excited to have Jennifer Lannon and Sidonia Swarm here. They are people that have been working in digital health, and they've actually now co-founded a new organization called Freeze Health. So we're super excited to have them here. I'm your host, Jen Horangeff from Savvy Cooperative, and today we're going to be continuing in our series about talking about things that revolve around the core values that Savvy has. So previously we've talked about innovating with purpose, being people first and people with, and really working with people, as well as challenging assumptions. So tonight we're talking about cultivating transparency. And I think we can all agree that this is something really important in healthcare. So tonight, Jennifer and Sidonia are going to help us get to the bottom of this. So welcome, ladies. I will let you guys kind of give a hello and let us know where you're calling in from tonight.
Absolutely. Go ahead, Jen. I think you're closest to other Jen.
I don't know.
I don't know. Actually, I don't know about that. We might have to Google Maps it.
Okay, so I'm Jennifer Lannon. I'm actually calling in from Maryland, which is very confusing because I am from Maryland, but I live in Miami, and I most recently was in New York before this. We're both kind of swirls on the travel front. I think Jen has the same thing in common. Calling in from Maryland.
Awesome. And Sidonia, where are you coming in from tonight?
I'm currently calling in from Vermont right now, outside of Rutland. I'm visiting family. My 89-year-old grandfather just had brain surgery. So family's meeting up here. He's doing well. He's a stud. So we're meeting up here, but based in Miami with Jen as well.
Awesome.
So.
Yeah, well, I mean, that really leads into the fact that you guys, I've met you guys personally. We know each other through working kind of in the digital health space. You guys have been working in this space for years now. And what's interesting, and that I think is a little bit different than some of the people that we've talked to, is that you're not people that have necessarily considered yourself patients. You're not people that have chronic illnesses, but you've now run into some things kind of within the healthcare system and saw how difficult it actually is. And so that's what I think you bring a really unique perspective to this today. And you know, we're going to be really diving into what you guys are doing personally. So I want to kind of set the stage for those of us that, or for our audience who's listening now and then in the future, that you guys have both recently froze your eggs. And I'm sure that we have a lot of people that are listening in that would be curious even to just know what interests you in doing that.
Yeah, so I'll start. I think out of the two of us, Sidonia and I were friends at the time when I first kind of, I was at a conference actually, like, you know, we go to so many of these health innovation types of conferences. And it was almost 3 years ago that I heard a keynote speaker that was founding a fertility company kind of talk about why he was doing it. And he was a super strong advocate for, if you're in your 20s and 30s and you're healthy, you should think about freezing your eggs, freezing your sperm, or freezing embryos if you're with a partner, because that's only going to increase your chances of success at having a healthy baby when you're ready to have one, whenever that might be. And so that just like, I had really never thought about it before, but it just kind of like hit me in the face all at once during this keynote speaker. And then he was speaking at another event where Sidonia and I were there together. So Sidonia, you know, I was like, Sidonia, you're going to die. This is going to make you think about it. Like, just wait. And she was kind of like, okay, whatever. Like,
yeah, exactly.
And then her mind was also blown. So I guess after that, you know, this is one of the things that we've realized with starting the project we're working on with Freeze, is that it really is kind of a long decision cycle for women, because even us as highly educated, motivated, and, you know, like healthcare educated consumers, it took almost 3 years from when we kind of first started hearing about it to actually doing the procedure. So yeah, I guess the short answer is we started thinking about it by hearing about it at a conference, but then every time we would see something in the news about egg freezing or some new kind of scientific article came out about it, we were just kind of like all over it. And the more and more we looked at the evidence, the science behind it, but also like the financial stuff behind it, we just kind of got more and more comfortable with it and decided that it was something we both wanted to do.
And I think that's really interesting because you mentioned this last week during your Instagram takeover that you did on Savvy Co-op's Instagram channel, that, you know, this was an elective procedure. And a lot of the individuals that might be Savvy Co-op members already, they might be patients that they have procedures done out of necessity. So I think it brings a different spin to it too. And, you know, as you were kind of going through, both of you going through this process, I'm curious, like, was this your first big interaction that you had with the healthcare system, or were there things leading up to this, or was it a total shocker of like, oh my gosh, this is really what it's like?
No, it's a great question because I think a lot of people who are innovators in healthcare have no idea from the patient perspective. So this was not my first interaction. I had an undiagnosed pelvic floor issue that began when I was 18, but that was as a patient who was expecting services to be reimbursed. So this was the first time I was looking for something from a cash pay perspective. And I think that's when I really noticed the difference in the opportunity there. So even though I have interacted as a patient with the healthcare system, it was entirely different scenarios because this was the first time I was like, wow, I actually have, you know, consumer power. I have a decision where before I was just waiting for a third party of kind of like in shackles, like, okay, where am I going, you know? And this was entirely different because you could select the clinic, you could select the doctor because there was no really third party influencing the decision. So I viewed it as very exciting and kind of hopeful because this was an entirely different scenario.
It's interesting you mentioned that because you know, even when we talk about terminology, talking about patients, consumers, customers, users, caregivers, whatever sort of noun.
Humans, people. Yeah.
But people get, you know, a lot of the patients have pushback around the term consumer because that implies that there are choices to be made. And like you say, a lot of the time you're told what to do, you're told where to go, and that hopefully someone will pay for it. But in this case, you really are more of a consumer because you were able to gather information and sort of make your own choices. Jen, how did you feel about that?
It was, again, so, you know, Sidonia had the experience of being more of a like traditional patient where she was dealing with something chronic and expecting it to get reimbursed and be covered by health insurance. I had really never had anything really acute or chronic. I mean, like I got my wisdom teeth out, but that was probably the biggest like interaction with healthcare or biggest kind of like procedure that I'd had. Never broken a bone, never, you know, like I was a very lucky and healthy person. So in terms of Sidonia talking about people at these health innovation conferences that have never really like been patients, that was me. So I was really kind of grateful to have this experience of knowing what it is like on the other side, because with groups like Savvy and you know, just kind of the whole like patient advocacy, patient empowerment, and using patients as part of the process for developing these innovations, I knew intuitively that it was really important. But actually going through it and learning how important it is to the process was, I mean, I don't know how we would have started what we're working on. I don't know how we would have started Freeze without having actually done this ourselves. We learned so much. So yeah, it was really beneficial to be on the other side and actually go through it.
Yeah, and not that anybody wants to be on that side in the receiving end. You guys had a choice, and you know, you talked about how you first heard about it years ago. So what was that experience like when then you were just trying to research for yourselves? Like, how am I going to go about doing that? How are we going to freeze your eggs?
Yeah, so I mean, the research part, I guess I'll let Sidonia talk first because she actually went to, I actually went with her. We went together to this first appointment, but why don't you tell what the first appointment was like when we were
starting? So we were based in the Miami area. We were looking locally first to see what our options would be nearby since the procedure does take a few weeks. I thought I wanted to be at home in Miami. So we're looking at the local options, and most of them, well, all of them are IVF focused. So these are really geared towards women, couples, people who are somewhere in their 30s, early 40s, who are looking to conceive, and it's more reactionary care. So the first feeling that I really felt by going to this initial consultation was guilt. Sounds terrible, but it's true because there's people who are sitting in the waiting room spending tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of dollars trying to get, you know, the last possible eggs in them, or really just trying to conceive with their partner. And there I'm sitting there as a 25-year-old woman trying to preserve my fertility. I just felt like the privilege and guilt, and I didn't really belong there. And I think that was a big turnoff to these initial clinics because I didn't feel like I had a place there. And that really got Jen and I looking at other clinics in other cities to be like, well, where do I fit? Like, where do I really belong? And where do I feel comfortable? And I shouldn't feel guilty. I should be empowered and excited about this. But inevitably, that's what we were feeling. And that was just the tip of the iceberg. Like after that, the just lack of complete transparency, I went into the initial appointment knowing I would have, blood monitoring and initial diagnostics. And then 2 weeks later, I got a bill for like $600. And no one told me about it. I never said, not even a bill. That's a good point. I was looking through my credit card bill going, oh, when did this happen? And it was unidentified miscellaneous charge, called the clinic, tried to clarify it, took a few days for them to get back to me what it even was. So that type of experience, I just was like, oh my gosh, like it doesn't fit us. I don't want to say millennials, but people are consumer expectations. There's so much transparency in all the other types of services we're using. Why is it not when it comes to healthcare that we're actually paying for? We're using our hard-earned money to pay for it. We accept that same type of service. So those two experiences, the guilt in the waiting room and then getting that charge, I should say, were the like, ooh, I don't know about this. I don't know if I can continue in this process at a traditional clinic.
Yeah, and now you guys are working to make more transparency around that. So other people, other consumers, as they're making those choices on whether or not they're going to freeze their eggs at all versus at
exactly.
Clinic A versus Clinic B, you want to help them, find out those pricing. So on that personal level, again, what were you finding as you went on this journey? What other sort of hidden things were out there?
Jen, do you want to talk about the anesthesia? That's my favorite.
Yeah. So I guess, after we went to that first appointment and we kind of realized that wasn't exactly what we were looking for, we started to do a lot of research. So we basically just started spending like dozens of hours calling the clinics in Miami. And then we even started looking outside of Miami. Sidonia, her family is from Chicago. So she started calling around clinics in Chicago. And then I, spent a lot of time in New York and have a bunch of friends in New York. And so I started calling around clinics in New York to see if there are any better options there. And so we basically were tracking all of this in a spreadsheet. At some point, we realized that this was probably information that a lot of other women were trying to track down as well. It's not something that's on the websites of these clinics, or at least very rarely is it on the website of the clinics. So that's one thing that was just like disappointing. Us as millennials, like we want the information exactly in the format that we want it in, where we want it. And that's almost always digitally. And just whenever we're looking it up online, we want to be able to know the information. So we were having to call during the business hours of the clinic. Invariably you'd get someone's voicemail and you'd have to wait for them to call you back, and they'd leave you a message to say, call me back. And then, just very crazy, trying to get information in the first place. And then when you did get the information, it's like egg freezing is a very simple procedure. It's usually, one price for the entire procedure from start to finish. Yet at the same time, the majority of clinics will have separate fees for things like anesthesia, as Sidonia mentioned. So every egg freezing cycle ends in a retrieval procedure in which you're under anesthesia. You're knocked out. There's no way you're not going to be knocked out. Like, trust me. And yet, so the clinics would tell you their pricing for an egg freezing cycle. And then I would start to get savvy and ask them, okay, is anesthesia separate? Are there any other fees? And then invariably they would come out with, oh, anesthesia is $400 extra or something like that. And, it's just like, okay, well then why wouldn't you have just told me that up front? And what if I didn't know to ask you that? I just would not have budgeted that. And I would have ended up at the very end of this having to fork over another $400, $500, $600 that I hadn't planned and budgeted for. The other one that I think is kind of ridiculous, and one of the reasons I chose the clinic that I went to, is most clinics will charge you $200, $300, sometimes more for the initial consultation, just to like meet with the doctor and get an evaluation. And especially for a procedure where you're going to end up spending thousands of dollars, a lot of times they won't even tell you the cost of the procedure until you come in for that first consultation, where, surprise, surprise, you're paying $300 for that initial consultation. And you're doing that just to like get a sense of what the procedure would be like at that clinic and what it would even cost you. So we ran into a lot of pushback from people even wanting to give us the price of the procedure over the phone and telling us, oh, well, we'll discuss that with you at your first consultation. And then I would say, okay, how much does the first consultation cost? And they would say, oh, it's $295, which is just ridiculous. Like, what if I want to shop around and know what my options are? Like, I'm not going to pay you $295 just to find out how much you're going to charge me for the procedure. So there were a lot of things that were just pretty egregious and ridiculous. And we kind of, you know, calling dozens, I think we got close to 100 clinics that we contacted. We just kind of got smart at figuring out some of the hidden fees and how to ask to get the pricing information that we wanted. And I honestly feel like in a lot of things in healthcare, it almost takes a PhD or even more to like figure out the way through the system. Luckily, because this is a consumer, like pretty much everyone pays cash. It's not really something that's reimbursed by insurance. It makes it a little bit easier to actually like negotiate pricing with the clinic or stick up for yourself and say, you know, I don't think that charge is appropriate. You're not dealing with an intermediary like a health insurance plan. But yeah, we started the project to basically put all of the information that we were digging for into a place that other women could access it to.
Well, that's what you're talking about here is like you guys both had sort of the wherewithal to even ask those questions, to shop around where, you know, some people might not necessarily even know those options are out there. And so, you know, when people aren't finding those prices, like what's the problem with that? I know it sounds super loaded, but why does that matter? Why should clinics, either for egg freezing or otherwise, be more transparent about their prices? Because how does that make you feel as an individual and as a consumer?
It helps both parties, in my opinion. It's not only helping us as the consumers or patients, they're going to get more women in their door our age, because not showing the price on your website, to me, is the biggest turnoff. It's like when you see a price of shoes. If the price tag's not on it, you probably can't afford it. But a lot of these clinics, these women could be affording their egg freezing. So I do think, yes, it will help the patient and, you know, the consumer tremendously, but it will also enable these clinics who traditionally have focused on the older market to really open up and adapt to the younger women who are interested in this.
I kind of liken it to my dad is an insurance salesman. Sorry, Dad, if you're watching right now. But, you know, he's like getting closer to retirement and he does everything over the phone. He, you know, hates sending email. He wants everything to be done in an in-person conversation, pick up the phone and call people, which is great. And he tries to tell me that that's how I should be doing business too. And I try to tell him that my generation is just different, you know, like I just want it in as short and concise of a format as possible on my phone. And I want it when I want it. So like Sidonia said, I think it's actually better for both parties. And not to mention all the time that we wasted calling all these clinics and trying to get calls back. The people at the clinic had to waste their time leaving us voicemails, calling us back when it could be solved with a simple piece of information online that a limitless number of people could access. And then from the patient perspective, you know, from a financial perspective, a lot of people spend a lot of time saving up money for a procedure like this. Especially when you talk about IVF, it gets even more expensive than egg freezing on its own. And, you know, I think something that is getting more attention in our world, but still doesn't get quite enough, is the financial burden of healthcare. And it's one of the largest causes of debt in our country. And like not being upfront about it is just, it's sad and it's not fair. And it has to be illegal in some way,
right?
It just doesn't seem right. But the other part of transparency that we're all about and we're pushing with the site, the next thing we're going to launch is reviews. So, you know, it's not just pricing that we're really passionate about. It's really all aspects of the process. So one of the things we're trying to do next is really bring the circle of feedback back around and capture all these women that have frozen their eggs at these different clinics. You know, if you go on like Google reviews or Yelp and you look at reviews for different clinics that perform egg freezing, the majority of them also perform IVF, and IVF makes up most of their practice. So if you look through the reviews, pretty much all of the reviews are going to be about patients that went through IVF at that practice, which, as Sidonia mentioned, is just a very different process, a different type of customer. than the type of woman who's going to freeze her eggs. So, you know, it's not just pricing that we feel really passionate about bringing transparency. It's also just the patient experience, kind of from a 360 perspective.
Yeah, well, I mean, you're talking about kind of reviews and wanting to understand how somebody else will weigh in. And of course, research has showed that that sort of peer-to-peer communication is one of the most important things in how people base their decisions.
Totally.
So when you guys were even going through this process, were you comparing notes together? It sounds like you had like a shared.
Absolutely, yes.
But did you talk about like kind of what you were finding?
We definitely did. So yeah, we actually had a shared Google Doc, or Google spreadsheet, I should say, where we were sharing the pricing that we were finding from the different clinics. So literally sharing on like a shared Google spreadsheet. We were literally sharing. And then we also, you know, I actually went with Sidonia to her first appointment at this clinic in South Florida. And I was thinking, you know, if it went well, then maybe I would go to the same clinic myself. We contacted a few other clinics in South Florida, and we kind of shared our experiences with those. And then when we ultimately did decide on our clinics, Sidonia went with one in Chicago and I went with one in New York. We kept each other totally posted, like at all phases. I think
one day we should release like screenshots of our WhatsApp conversation for the few weeks.
Yeah.
It might be a little embarrassing, but you'd get the real deal of it.
We were kind of monsters, just because we're monsters in general. And we were monsters on hormones. So
So you talk about that like you go through this process and that you had each other kind of as support. So what should people who are considering freezing their eggs, we talk about what kind of transparency we need, what other resources do they need, and what do they need to do to prepare to go through this process?
Honestly, I think like talking to someone that has actually done it before is probably one of the most beneficial things. And as much as I love online resources and, you know, they can add so much value, honestly, like you said, like talking to someone that you know is there's really nothing that compares to that still, even in this age of digital. Like still, Sidonia went through a couple weeks before me. So having her go through it, I actually got like such a leg up because I knew exactly what to expect versus poor Sidonia. Like we didn't really have a very close friend that had gone through it before. So she was kind of the guinea pig. But from my
story of my life,
from my perspective, knowing exactly what she went through right before and knowing that she was fine, you know, she had side effects and everything, but you know, she got through it and she felt empowered and she felt like it was a good decision. That was everything to me. So that's, you know, kind of what we were trying to do with the Instagram stories that I was doing with like doing the injections to myself and like taking people behind the scenes of what actually happens, because there's a lot in the media. There's so much in the media about egg freezing, but pretty much all of it is like pretty surface level. You know, there's a few places where you can really dive deeper. We actually have a few on our site. We list like some podcasts and some books that really take you deeper into the process. But most of the articles that you'll read on like Huffington Post or like little snippets on the Today Show, they're just like surface level that it gives you like a very brief overview. But again, like it took us 2.5 years after first hearing about it in one of those very brief overviews to dive deeper. So we have a tab on freeze.health that says learn more, where we post some content ourselves, but then we also link to content that we think is helpful. I guess I'll just say like briefly that it is actually an intense procedure. You know, for the 2 weeks, you're injecting yourself every day, which again, in a lot of these surface level articles, they don't even bring that part up, but it's something that you should know. And then you're also going in for transvaginal ultrasounds, which means it goes inside you. Don't worry, they put a condom on it.
We were worried.
Transvaginal ultrasounds, you get blood tested kind of every other day, sometimes every day towards the end. And then you do have that retrieval at the end where you're fully knocked out under anesthesia. You know, you have like a recovery period after that. So, you know, I'd say it's on the milder end of some procedures that you could do. And if you're okay with needles, you'll probably not have that much of an issue with it. And even though it is that kind of intensive a procedure, there's still by some estimates, 70 something thousand women this year that are going to freeze their eggs. So it's clearly something that women still find is valuable enough to be doing. But before you just go and sign up and pay money to go freeze your eggs, like, you should know what you're doing.
And that's
it's time consuming.
We actually have from somebody who's asking, you know, how many clinics did you guys actually talk to before deciding where you ended up?
So,
great question.
So at some point in this, we decided to expand cities, and we kind of had the process down. And at some point before we decided to freeze our eggs, we decided we wanted to build the site. So we kept researching in other cities besides where we thought we might actually freeze, because we thought it would add value to more women when we did make the site live. So I'd say, like, clinics that we were considering would be clinics in Miami, clinics in Chicago, and clinics in New York. And between all of those, it was almost 70, 75 between cities.
That's wild.
Yeah.
Yep.
Wow. Wow. And we have another question. Where did you give yourself the shots?
What was that?
Where did you give yourself your shots?
So you can do them in your abdomen. They say, my clinic said pinch an inch. So you pick about like an inch or two, like up and down from your belly button, and about like an inch or two out from your belly button. And so on the right side and the left side, like usually I would alternate. You just kind of like pinch an area that's about an inch wide, and you swipe it with alcohol, and you put it in there. You can also do it on your thighs, although for me, I was fine enough in the abdomen that I just kept doing it there. And then for the last shot, some people have to do it in their butt. I got lucky enough that I got to just do it in my.
I did it in the butt. Yeah.
Oh, you did it in the butt. Mine was in the ass.
Yeah.
We're just gonna just right there. We're gonna.
Yeah, exactly. Good sound bite.
Just for that sound.
Put that on LinkedIn.
I know that was a lead in there. I just wanted that.
Yep. So many puns in this. It's so much fun.
Gosh.
Amazing. So you guys have gone through this whole process, and you were, like you say, talking about how you came from digital health before. You were both working for Dot Health and helping people understand how to get into the healthcare sphere. So after going through this process, this might be a natural lead-in for what we do at Savvy, but do you actually now see value in having people who have these lived experiences weighing in? You guys started a company, but is there value for even just feedback for others? Like if you guys had talked to other women who had gone through this process, would that have helped to inform, you know, the work that you're doing even now?
Absolutely. I think it would have made it more robust, but the primary experience is, you know, you can't put it into words. I think like even just Jen and I sharing our experiences, they were similar, but they also varied tremendously. So I think, you know, the more people you can talk to, the more experience that really kind of paints the picture of the mosaic, because there is not one clear picture. So
yeah, I think
that was phenomenal.
I think that exactly, like there isn't just one typical patient. We like to say that what we're building is for us, but at the same time, there's no
us. Yeah, exactly.
That's exactly me. There's no group of people that's exactly Sidonia. So, you know, even between the two of us, we froze for somewhat different reasons. We had different experiences. We went to different clinics. And so even just like the typical egg freezing patient, there's no such thing. And then the other thing I would say is like now we kind of feel like we're too smart. Like we know too much about this process that, you know, there's certain parts of what we're building that we're like, we actually need fresh eyes of people that don't have the experience that we've gone through, and people kind of at different stages of that journey of defining. So yeah, there's always a need. Like now we're at a point where we feel like we're experts in this. And, you know, we have our PhDs in egg freezing, but sometimes we want to talk to people that only have a master's, or sometimes we want to talk to people that are thinking about majoring in egg freezing. And, you know, it's helpful to like have different types of people for different parts of the process.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's something that we certainly advocate for, is just, you know, you shouldn't even be talking to the same sort of high level advocates, like you say, who have their sort of PhDs in this, if you want to understand how you can get others involved, and how can we talk to people who maybe egg freezing was never on their radar, or they never thought they could afford it because they never actually knew how much it cost. I always just knew it was expensive. but I didn't know any of it because I first of all just like wasn't curious to go find that information because I know that it can be so difficult. And so sometimes just getting over that hump can be really challenging for people. So I think, you know, what you guys are doing is tremendous. And you're truly those examples of people using their experiences for good and developing something meaningful for others that are going to face similar challenges. So let's have you tell us a little bit more about what you're doing at Freeze Health. I know you guys just launched. So what can people expect now, and what are you guys working to build in the future?
Absolutely. So what Jen was explaining, the next step for us is having reviews of women who have frozen their eggs at different clinics. So if you're watching this and you have frozen your eggs, we'd love you to write a review, or if you know anybody who has. And just as we're trying to save time with the price transparency, we're just trying to save people's time from asking around, because like Jen was saying, it should be illegal that you can't post the prices. What we can give back is we can save women their time, and that truly is your most precious resource. So the reviews will be next up, and then there's a few things we have up in our sleeves, but we're really just trying to understand interest of how can we make the process more easy, straightforward, and affordable for women.
That's terrific. I mean, we just need everybody to be doing that now, but as we know, it's not quite that easy so often in healthcare because there are so many stakeholders. But in this case, where you are the consumer and the one paying for it, hopefully we can continue to drive that not only in egg freezing, but other avenues of elective procedures or places where people are paying out of pocket. Exactly. All right, you guys have been amazing. So now let's move on to our rapid fire questions, just quickly to get to know you a little bit better. So when you guys aren't being savvy and helping others understand sort of price transparency around egg freezing, what are you doing for fun?
I triathlon.
Woo, that's a noun. Intense.
I'm in the sun doing something, either rollerblading, beach volleyball, boxing.
Oh my gosh, I'm so excited you said rollerblading. My husband makes fun of me, but I love a good rollerblade.
Does he? Yes.
Oh my gosh. Well, next
I love it too.
To New York,
I'll bring my blades. Yeah.
Amazing. And so you guys have just gone through a lot of this, and you might have examples from this personal experience, but what do you think one of the biggest healthcare challenges that we have to address is?
For me, I say it's health insurance, because what we've built we would not have had a product right now if we had to deal with health insurance. So that's my next frontier of what needs to be fixed.
Oh,
yeah. Playing off of exactly what Jen said, I think we don't understand the ramifications and kind of like the quantitative data of the financial stress of healthcare on clinical outcomes. So not even just addressing it from an economic perspective, but people's, physical and emotional health is taking a toll due to financial stress. So tackling that head on, and the more, consumer power we can give people, I think that really can make decisions that they feel ownership in.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, anytime that I get a new company or startup coming to me and saying, yeah, we want to understand how your co-op feels about pricing and getting payments reimbursed or something, and I have like a visceral reaction because I just know from my own experience. It's so hard. Being sick or having a chronic condition or disability is challenging enough. And then you add the complexities, and it's not even predictable of what the prices can be, that it's so hard to plan, and it just adds so much extra stress, both to the individual as well as their families. So
if researchers can quantify that somehow, I will be reading that report, because I think that's something that should be talked about more.
Yeah, well, I can say on a personal level, when some of the research that I do around patient-centered outcomes, even though people identify and patients identify the financial burden of disease being, really important, there are so many other important variables that oftentimes that gets left out just because they can't measure everything at once. So otherwise they'd have to sample an even larger group. But, I just keep waiting for the time that it's actually included. And there are other studies that do look at it, but we're just not looking at it in the sort of biopsychosocial model of how it has an impact on people. And we need to understand that if we're going to be transparent about it. All right, my favorite question that I always give people time to prepare is, what song title do you think best describes the current state of healthcare?
Go ahead, Jen.
Okay, I love Cardi B. Mine is Be Careful. Be Careful with Me by Cardi B.
Amazing.
Yeah. Do you want me to explain why? I mean,
please do.
Probably obvious. Everyone should be careful with me. Be careful with me, but also like, it's kind of like, do you know that you're fucking me up right now with what you're doing and you're messing up something that's really great? That's kind of how I feel about a lot of the things that happen in healthcare. Like, I might just come back at you and disrupt you if you don't watch out.
There you go. Isn't that like final words? All right, Sidonia, what you got?
Okay, so a little bit of a curveball, but similar genre. The DMX song, Party Up. You know, the song where it's like, y'all gonna make me lose that song. Everyone loses their mind with healthcare at some point of the process. And I wanted some DMX on your playlist to spice it up.
Yeah, now we've got like Lennon and and Cardi B and DMX.
Yeah. Miami's coming in hot with you. Cardi B and DMX.
To all of our viewers to go see our new Spotify playlist. You can either search for Savvy Healthcare Soundtrack or go to our website, savvy.coop/savvy-soundtrack to find our Spotify playlist. But oh my gosh, guys, you were totally amazing. And I am so excited for the journey that you're on, and on behalf of all women and their partners who maybe now or in the future looking at egg freezing. I think what you guys are doing at Freeze Health is tremendous. And I thank you guys for coming on here tonight and for having us. Woo! Our viewers next week, stay tuned. We have a super duper guest. Lee Kim is going to be joining us. She is with Pfizer and a design thinker and does 1,000 different things to really make sure people understand really human-centered design. And she's going to be talking with us about loving what you do. And that's really one of our core values that, of course, we feel very strongly about, and she really embodies it. So we're going to have a fun chat with her next week. And if you're lucky, she'll be wearing some pipe cleaners on her head, as she usually is found doing. So we're going to have a good time then. But in the meantime, thank you, ladies, so much for joining us.
Thank you.
Thanks so much.
Thanks, guys. And with that, we will leave you till next week. So thank you to our viewers for joining another Savvy Chat. Everyone have a great night. Take care.